Welcome to the deep dive. We take a fascinating source, break it down, and pull out the key insights tailored for you.
And today we're really digging into something foundational.
We are. It's Pope Benedict VI's first encyclical letter, Deus caritas est, God is love. It came out on Christmas Day, 2005.
A really significant text.
Definitely. And our mission today, it's to unpack its central ideas about Christian love. What does it tell us about God and, well, about ourselves?
It kicks off with such a powerful line, doesn't it? From 1 John. God is love, and he who abides in love abides in God, and God abides in him.
Right. And the encyclical immediately frames being Christian not as, just signing up for an ethical code.
Or idea.
Exactly, but as an encounter with this God who is love. That feels like the starting point for everything else.
It absolutely is. It reframes the whole experience. It's about a relationship, fundamentally.
Okay, so let's hold on to that. Relationship, not just rules. And you mentioned it connects to Israel's faith.
Yeah, deeply. That core command, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and might. Jesus reinforces this, obviously.
The greatest commandment.
Right. But he links it immediately, inextricably, with loving your neighbor as yourself.
Okay.
But here's a key insight the encyclical draws out. It's not just presented as a command anymore. It's a response.
A response. How so?
Because, as John also writes, God has first loved us. So our love isn't the starting point. It's a reaction, almost a natural consequence of receiving God's love first.
Yeah.
It shifts the whole dynamic.
Ah, I see. So it's less about us reaching up with effort and more about responding to a love that's already come down.
Precisely. Love is a gift received, which then overflows into love given.
That feels incredibly important, especially now, in a time where religion or God's name sometimes gets twisted.
Linked to violence or hatred, sadly.
Yeah. This anchors it back. The fundamental truth is God is love.
Absolutely. And, right away, the encyclical dives into a potential problem we all face.
Which is?
The word love itself.
Ah, right. We use it for everything.
Exactly. Love of country, love of friends, romantic love of chocolate, you name it.
So the word gets kind of diluted.
It can, yeah. It makes it harder to grasp the specific profound meaning of divine love or even the different kinds of human love when the same word covers so much ground.
So is it all just shades of the same thing, or are these fundamentally different realities we're just sort of labeling the same way?
That's the question it explores. And it brings in those helpful Greek terms.
Okay, like eros.
Right. Eros, that passionate, often searching, romantic love. Then philia, friendship, camaraderie.
And the big one in Christian thought, agape.
Exactly. Agape, that self-giving, self-sacrificing, unconditional love. And it's interesting, the New Testament writers, they overwhelmingly prefer agape. They use eros much less frequently.
Which leads us straight to that famous critique from Nietzsche, doesn't it?
It does. The idea that Christianity actually poisoned eros.
That's a pretty harsh accusation. What was his thinking there?
Well, Nietzsche felt that Christianity, with its emphasis on, say, self-denial, spirituality over the body, had basically suppressed or demonized the life-affirming, joyful energy of eros. He saw it as turning against earthly happiness.
But the encyclical pushes back on that, right? By looking at how eros was seen before Christianity, and maybe even within the Old Testament itself.
Yes, exactly. It looks at the ancient world, Greek culture, for example, where eros was often seen as this divine madness.
Divine madness.
Yeah, kind of ecstatic force, an intoxication that could lift you out of the everyday. Think of Virgil. Love conquers all. This sometimes got expressed in fertility cults, even temple prostitution.
Okay, which sounds problematic from a monotheistic perspective.
Definitely. And the Old Testament came down hard on those practices. It saw them as a distortion, a turning away from the one true God.
And this seems key. It wasn't rejecting eros itself.
That's the crucial distinction Benedict makes. The Old Testament didn't want to eliminate eros, but to cleanse it, to challenge its warped forms.
How so?
Well, things like temple prostitution, they reduced the human person to an instrument, right? Just a means to achieve some kind of ecstatic state, stripping away their dignity.
So it's not about killing desire, but purifying it, disciplining it.
Exactly. An unchecked eros, just pure instinct, doesn't really elevate us. It can actually degrade us. So eros needs purification, discipline, maturity. So it can offer not just fleeting pleasure, but a real taste of true joy, that deep happiness, beatitude that we're all ultimately searching for.
Like refining gold, maybe? Getting rid of the impurities to find the real value?
That's a great analogy. And this whole process is tied to who we are, body and soul.
Right, we're not just one or the other.
We're a unity. So you can't just discard the body for some purely spiritual ideal, nor can you reduce yourself just to the body, to biology. Love involves the whole person.
It feels like that speaks to today, too. Sometimes we see the body treated almost like an object.
For sure. The encyclical talks about reducing eros to just sex,
True.
something you can buy, sell, use, exploit. It seems like it's celebrating the body, but it actually devalues it, separates it from our personhood, our freedom.
And this journey of purification, the encyclical uses the Song of Songs to illustrate it.
Yes, which is fascinating. This collection of, well, seemingly erotic love poems in the Old Testament.
How does it show this progression?
Through the language itself. Initially, it uses the Hebrew word dodim for love, which suggests something still searching, maybe a bit uncertain, possessive even.
Okay.
But then it shifts to using ahaba, and the Greek translation of the Old Testament uses agape for ahaba.
Ah, so it moves towards that self-giving love.
Exactly. It signifies a love that's matured. It's discovered the other person, moved beyond just its own needs, and involves real care, concern, even willingness to sacrifice.
From inward-looking desire to outward-focused care.
Precisely. And this purified love, it wants to be definitive. It seeks exclusivity, you alone, and permanence forever. It embraces our whole existence, time included, but looks towards eternity.
And this involves ecstasy.
Yes, but maybe not just in the sense of momentary high, more like a permanent state of going out of oneself, an exodus from the closed-in self towards self-giving, self-sacrifice, and paradoxically finding your true self in the process.
Moving beyond the self to find the self, that's powerful.
Okay, so eros isn't destroyed, it's matured into a gaff, but they aren't totally separate either.
That's the next crucial step. The encyclical argues that love is fundamentally one reality, but with different dimensions. Trying to completely separate eros and agape just impoverishes both.
How so?
Well, even in eros, that ascending, searching love, there's usually an element of wanting the beloved to be happy, right? That's agape starting to enter in.
True.
And conversely, you can't just live on self-giving, oblative love alone. We also need to receive love. It's a two-way street.
Like breathing in and breathing out. Exactly. Giving and receiving are both vital.
And the image used here is Jacob's ladder.
Yes, interpreted by church fathers like Pope Gregory the Great, the angels going up and down.
So, ascending.
That's like the contemplative dimension, receiving God's love, eros reaching for the divine.
And descending.
That's the active love of neighbor, sharing the love we've received, agape in action. They're inseparable. Contemplation fuels action, and action leads back to contemplation.
It's a cycle. Okay, this sets the stage for what the encyclical calls the newness of biblical faith. Two key aspects, the image of God and the image of man. Let's start with God. How is the biblical image different?
Well, think about the surrounding cultures in the ancient Near East.
Yeah.
Lots of gods, often conflicting, kind of vague.
Right.
The Bible presents this radical monotheism. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one Lord, one Creator. And this Creator loves His creation, especially humanity, with a personal choosing love.
A love that the encyclical describes using both eros and agape language again?
Yes, which sounds like a contradiction, but isn't. God's love has that passionate seeking quality of eros. Think of the prophets Hosea and Ezekiel using marriage imagery.
Right, God is the bridegroom, Israel is the bride, idolatry is adultery. Very intense stuff.
Very intense. But it's also completely agape because it's totally gratuitous, freely given, unmerited, and profoundly forgiving.
And this love wasn't just, an abstract feeling. It was shown in actions.
Absolutely. The giving of the Torah, the law. That wasn't just a rule book. It was God showing Israel the path to true humanism, how to live in right relationship with Him and each other, finding joy and faithfulness.
And that forgiveness aspect you mentioned. The encyclical points to Hosea, where God's compassion overcomes His anger.
Yes, Hosea 11. It's incredibly powerful. God's love is so strong it seems to override strict justice. It's presented as a prefigurement of the cross.
Wow. The cross is the ultimate expression of that divine compassion overcoming judgment.
For Christians, yes, where God's passionate love leads Him to, in a sense, turn against Himself, His justice, out of love for us.
There's also this philosophical layer, right? God as the ultimate source, the logos, and a passionate lover.
Exactly. The biblical God isn't just a philosophical principle or just raw passion. He's both. The ground of all being and an involved, passionate lover. This understanding allows eros and agape to meet, purifying eros to the point where it can describe God's relationship with humanity.
Which helps explain how something like the Song of Songs could be read mystically.
Precisely. It came to be seen not just as human love poetry, but is describing the love story between God and his people, leading towards mystical union. Not a merging where you disappear, but a unity of love where both remain distinct.
Okay, that's the image of God. What about the image of humankind, the second part of this newness, the creation story? Adam's solitude.
Right, Genesis shows Adam having dominion over everything, but he's alone. He lacks a true counterpart, someone face to face.
Until Eve is created.
Yes, created from his side, bone of my bones, flesh of my flesh. It signifies this deep complementarity, this inherent incompleteness that drives humans to seek communion. The encyclical notes Plato's myth of the split androgynous being searching for its other half, a similar intuition, maybe?
And biblically, where does this incompleteness, this eros, find its proper expression?
In monogamous marriage. According to the creation account, Eros directs man and woman towards this unique, lifelong bond. It becomes an image, a reflection of God's own faithful covenantal love for his people. That link between Eros and marriage is really central to the biblical view.
So all this background, God's nature as love, human nature seeking communion, culminates in Jesus Christ.
Absolutely. The encyclical says the real novelty of the New Testament isn't just new ideas, but Jesus himself. He is the incarnate love of God.
Made visible, tangible.
Yes, with unprecedented realism, as the text puts it. Think of his parables, the lost sheep, the lost coin, the prodigal son. These aren't just illustrations. They show God actively, relentlessly searching for us.
And the ultimate demonstration is the cross.
The cross is presented as the absolute peak of God's love. God turning against himself, taking on death out of love to give us life. Benedict suggests starting with Christ's pierced side to truly understand God is love.
But Jesus didn't just die, he gave us the Eucharist. How does that fit in?
The Eucharist is how Jesus makes that self-giving love perpetually present, giving his body and blood at the Last Supper, anticipating his death and resurrection. It's not just a symbol.
So participation.
Yes, it draws us into the dynamic of his self-offering, that idea of the marriage covenant between God and Israel. It reaches a whole new level of intimacy here. We're not just in God's presence, we're united with him through sharing in Jesus' sacrifice.
And this has a social aspect too, right? It's not just me and Jesus.
Definitely not. The encyclical calls it sacramental mysticism, but emphasizes its communal nature. Receiving communion makes us one body with Christ, and therefore one body with everyone else who receives him.
Love of God and love of neighbor become fused.
Inseparably. St. Paul's one body in Corinthians, and interestingly, the term agape itself came to be used for the Eucharist in the early church. It was seen as God's love physically entering the community to continue his work.
So, Jesus' great commandment, love God, love neighbor, isn't just a moral rule added on top.
No, it flows directly from this experience of God's agape. It's interwoven with faith, with worship, with our whole way of being. Love can be commanded because it has first been given.
And the parables really drive this home.
Absolutely. The rich man and Lazarus, a stark warning about closing our eyes to the needy. The Good Samaritan demolishing boundaries about who our neighbor is. It's anyone in need, demanding concrete action.
And the big one, the Last Judgment in Matthew 25.
Yeah, that's pivotal. Jesus identifies himself directly with the hungry, thirsty, naked, sick, imprisoned. Whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me.
There it is. Love of God and love of neighbor are one. Serving the needy is serving Christ.
It becomes the ultimate criterion. In the face of the poor, we meet Jesus himself.
Okay, but this raises some big questions. Like, can we really love a God we can't see? And can you actually command love? Isn't it just a feeling?
Very fair questions, and the encyclical tackles them head on. First, about seeing God. Okay, no one has seen God in his full essence, true.
Right.
But God hasn't remained totally invisible either. He made himself visible in Jesus. Whoever has seen me has seen the Father, Jesus says in John's Gospel.
So we encounter God through Jesus.
Yes, and also through his ongoing presence in the church, in the sacraments, in the Word, in the community of believers. So our love isn't reaching into a void. It's a response to a love that has already shown itself and continues to show itself.
Okay, what about commanding love? Can you force a feeling?
The encyclical clarifies that love is more than just a feeling, though feelings are often part of it. Mature love involves the will and the intellect, too.
That's so.
It's about acknowledging God, saying yes to his will, choosing to align ourselves with him. This involves our whole being. It's a process, a journey. Think of that old Latin phrase, idem vere atque idem nole.
Wanting the same things and rejecting the same things.
Exactly. That's what happens in deep love, human or divine. A communion of will and thought develops.
So loving our neighbor, even the difficult ones, even strangers, It becomes possible because we first encounter God's love.
Yes, we start to see others through Christ's eyes, with his love. It's not just about dropping off groceries, though that's important. It's about offering that look of love, seeing the person made in God's image.
It makes the two commandments truly inseparable then.
Utterly inseparable.
Hmm.
Both flow from God's love coming first. It's not some impossible external burden, but an inner gift, an experience of love received that then naturally wants to flow outwards, and love grows through loving.
Leading towards that ultimate unity where God is all in all.
That's the vision.
Okay, that wraps up the first, more theological part. Part two dives into caritas, the practice of love by the church.
Right, the church as a community of love, and it starts with that great quote from St. Augustine.
If you see charity, you see the Trinity.
Yeah, it connects the church's practical love directly back to the inner life of God. The Father sends the Son gives the Spirit, and the Spirit empowers the church to love as God loves. The church is meant to be a reflection of that Trinitarian communion.
So all the church's activity, evangelization, sacraments, charity, it's all part of this one mission of love, seeking the total well-being of the person.
Exactly. And charitable service, caritas, isn't just one option among many. It's an essential, indispensable expression of the church's very nature.
And it's a responsibility for everyone, not just specialists.
For the whole church, individual believers, yes, but also the community as a whole. Think back to the early church in Acts.
Holding all things in common.
Yes, that radical sharing. While the forms evolved, that core principle remained. Within the community of faith, nobody should lack the basic necessities for a dignified life.
And the creation of the diaconate, the deacons, was a key step in organizing this.
A decisive moment, the encyclical calls it. It started because of a practical problem, making sure Greek-speaking widows got their fair share. But it wasn't just admin. They chose men full of the Spirit and wisdom. This service, this diaconia of charity, was seen as a fundamental ministry, part of the church's essential structure from early on.
And this commitment stayed central throughout history.
Absolutely. The encyclical cites early writers like Justin Martyr, Tertullian, Ignatius in Antioch. They all show how caring for widows, orphans, prisoners, the sick, it was just as essential as preaching the word and celebrating the sacraments. It was part of who they were.
You even see organized structures emerging, like the diaconia.
Yes, especially in places like Egypt and Rome. Organized centers for charitable work.
And that story of Deacon Lawrence, presenting the poor as the church's treasure.
Such a powerful image. Instead of gold and silver, he shows the emperor, the poor, the suffering, the vulnerable. These are the true riches of the church. It turns worldly values completely upside down.
Even opponents of Christianity, like Emperor Julian the Apostate, recognized the power of this.
They did. Julian saw Christian charity as a major reason for the church's growth and influence. He even tried to get pagan temples to start similar charitable programs to compete. It shows the impact it had.
So the encyclical really lands on two key points here. One, the church's core identity involves word, sacrament, and charity. They're inseparable.
Right. Charity isn't just optional social work. It's fundamental to being the church.
And two, while this love extends universally, like the Good Samaritan, there's a special primary responsibility for those within the household of faith, as Paul says.
Exactly. The church as God's family, where members have a particular duty to care for one another's basic needs.
Okay, now this leads into a really important discussion. The relationship between charity and justice, especially addressing that Marxist critique from the 19th century.
Yes, the argument that the poor don't need handouts, charity, they need justice. And that charity can even be a way to prop up unjust systems, to keep people quiet.
Which, let's be honest, can sometimes have a grain of truth, right?
The encyclical acknowledges that. It affirms that striving for a just social order is a fundamental task, primarily for the state. Christian teaching itself demands justice, ensuring everyone gets their due share. The church's social doctrine developed significantly partly in response to these issues.
But it also critiques the purely Marxist solution.
It does. It argues that the promise of revolution and collectivism, creating a perfectly just world, turned out to be, well, an illusion, often leading to new forms of oppression.
So what's the alternative?
The church's social doctrine, based on reason and natural law, offers guidelines for building a more just world. It aims to purify reason and help form consciences, especially for those involved in political life.
But the church doesn't try to be the state, right?
No, there's a clear distinction. Render unto Caesar. The church respects the autonomy of the political sphere. It doesn't impose its faith, but argues for justice, using reason accessible to everyone.
So building just structures is mainly a political task for citizens, for politicians.
Primarily, yes. The church's role is more indirect, forming consciences, offering ethical guidance, awakening the spiritual energies needed for the hard work of justice.
But the church can't just stay silent on the sidelines either.
Absolutely not. It has a duty to speak out, to offer its rational insights and spiritual resources.
And crucially, the encyclical argues that even if we achieved a perfectly just society,
Which is probably impossible anyway.
right, but even then, love caritas would still be necessary.
Always. Because no political or economic system can eliminate personal suffering, loneliness, loss, the need for comfort, for a listening ear, for personal concern. Justice provides the framework, but love provides the human touch.
There's a warning against the state becoming this massive impersonal bureaucracy that tries to provide everything but can't offer that personal care.
Exactly. The state should support, according to the principle of subsidiarity, the initiatives of individuals and groups, including the church's charitable works, that can provide that personal touch.
So the claim that justice makes charity redundant is based on a flawed view of the human person.
Yes, a materialistic view, as if man lives by bread alone. We need more than material goods. We need love, recognition, personal connection.
So how does it all fit together? Justice and charity.
For the lay faithful acting as citizens, working for just structures is a primary duty. You could call it social charity. For the church as an institution, its organized charitable activities are its opus proprium, its own proper work. And for every individual Christian, personal acts of charity remain essential, complementing the pursuit of justice.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, the encyclical looks at charitable work in the modern world. Things have changed, haven't they?
Dramatically. Mass communication, globalization. We're much more aware of suffering anywhere on the planet. It feels closer.
Yeah, the global village idea.
Right. And we've seen huge advances in humanitarian aid capacity, yet immense suffering continues. So the need for readiness to help is perhaps even greater.
And we see more cooperation between state agencies and church organizations.
Often, yes. And church agencies can bring their specific ethos, that formation of the heart, to the partnership,
There's also been a huge growth in secular charities and volunteerism.
which the encyclical praises. It sees this as a positive sign, recognizing the dedication involved, especially among young people, finding solidarity through service.
And new forms of charity within Christian communities, too, often linking practical help with sharing faith.
Yes, and the encyclical affirms the Catholic Church's willingness to collaborate with these efforts, wherever there's a shared commitment to authentic human well-being based on the dignity of the person created in God's image.
So, with all these different groups doing good work, what makes the church's charitable activity distinct? What's its specific character?
Well, first, it recognizes that the impulse to love our neighbor is written into human nature by the Creator. And Christianity has certainly amplified that. But church charity needs to maintain its own splendor, not just become another form of social assistance.
How does it do that? What are the key elements?
One is that immediate response to need, like the Good Samaritan, providing basics, food, clothing, health care, visiting prisoners. This requires professional competence, yes.
You need to know what you're doing.
Absolutely. But it also requires that formation of the heart, being truly moved by Christ's love for the person you're serving, seeing Christ in them.
Another key element is independence.
Yes, independence from parties and ideologies. Christian charity isn't trying to change the world according to some political blueprint or strategy. It's about making God's love present now, because humanity always needs that love.
It pushes back against that idea that charity just props up the system.
It does. It argues that sacrificing people today for some uncertain future utopia is itself inhumane. The Christian way is a heart which sees the need now and acts with personal commitment, free from partisan agendas.
And the third element, the question of proselytism.
Right. Love has to be free. Charity isn't a sneaky tactic to get conversions,
Look,
but it is concerned with the whole person. And often, the deepest poverty isn't material, but spiritual. The absence of God, meaninglessness.
so it's not about forcing faith.
Never. But those involved in church charity recognize that offering pure, generous love is actually the best witness to the God who inspires it. It's about knowing when to speak of God and when to simply let love speak for itself. Disdaining love is ultimately disdaining God and humanity. Love is the best defense.
Okay, so who is ultimately responsible for this work?
The encyclical is clear. The true subject is the church herself. At all levels, parish, diocese, universal church.
And specific roles.
The Pontifical Council Coronum provides coordination from the Holy See, but the primary responsibility lies with the bishops in their local churches. It's an essential part of their pastoral ministry, right from their ordination.
And what about the people on the ground, the volunteers, the staff?
They need to be motivated by faith working through love, as St. Paul says, moved by Christ's love, wanting the church to be his instrument. They should work with the church in communion with the bishop.
And have a sense of the bigger picture.
Yes, an openness to the Catholic, the universal dimension, working harmoniously with others, but not losing the distinctiveness of the Christian calling.
And it all comes back to that personal encounter with Christ, quoting 1 Corinthians 13.
If I give away all I have, but do not have love, I gain nothing. Charity is always more than just activity. It has to flow from love, nourished by meeting Christ. True sharing means giving yourself, not just your surplus.
And this leads to humility.
It should. Serving others reminds us we aren't superior. Christ took the lowest place. Helping is a grace we receive, not something we achieve by our own merit. We're just instruments, useless servants in the gospel phrase. We do our part and entrust the rest to God.
It also addresses those temptations we face when dealing with huge needs, right? Either becoming an ideologue who thinks they can fix everything or just giving up in despair.
Yes, the antidote to both is a living relationship with Christ, fueled by prayer.
Prayer isn't escaping the work.
No, it's the source of strength for the work. Think of Blessed Teresa of Calcutta. Her power came from prayer. It prevents burnout, fanaticism, resentment. It keeps us grounded in God's love, trusting his goodness, even when we don't understand everything.
That quote from Augustine, if you understand him, he is not God.
Exactly. Faith, hope, and charity belong together. Faith in God's love gives rise to charity, and both are sustained by hope in God's ultimate victory. Love is the light that allows us to keep going. And it's possible because we're made in God's image.
So the encyclical wraps up by pointing to the saints.
Yes, as concrete examples, Martin of Tours sharing his cloak, Francis of Assisi, Vincent de Paul, Mother Teresa, countless others. They show what this love looks like in practice. They are bearers of light.
And Mary is presented as the ultimate example.
The mother of the Lord, yes. Her service to Elizabeth, her Magnificat, her whole life centered on God and neighbor, her humility, faith, hope, her closeness to the Word. She embodies that pure, selfless love born from union with God.
A beautiful culmination. And the encyclical ends, really, with an invitation to us, doesn't it?
A very personal invitation to experience this love ourselves and then let God's light shine through us into the world. It closes with a prayer, entrusting us all to Mary's care.
So the final thought we want to leave you with, echoing the encyclical spirit, is this. How can you, reflecting on this deep dive into God's love, allow that love to shape your own life, your interactions, your actions? What rivers of living water, as Jesus promised, might flow from you if you truly embrace this encounter?